You are now listening to KRAN's podcast, Stories Without Limits. Thank you for tuning in. Hello and welcome to Stories Without Limit, the podcast where we explore the powerful stories shaping lives and community. In today's episode, we're really thrilled to have a very special guest, broadcaster, author, and KRAN's patron, Gavin Esler. Thank you for coming in.
I'm very pleased to be here.
Thank you. So, Gavin, is your first anniversary as a KRAN patron. Just want us to reflect back and to see what's inspired you to be involved with KRAN basically, and what is the past year was for you?
Well, the past year has been very exciting, very interesting. I've been able to take part in some KRAN events, meet a lot of people, a lot of people that are helped by KRAN, and a lot of people who work for KRAN.
Sure.
And that has been wonderful. And I've also been able to do a lot of thinking, particularly around the Christmas period, about refugees and what we can do for them. Because one of the things that strikes me is the United Kingdom remains a largely Christian country, and the core of Christianity is about refugees.
Indeed.
Mary and Joseph were refugees.
I've done a story about it before. It's just take you back to that story. It's still looking to find a home where to sit, and then it does link to that.
Safety.
Yeah.
And that's been true of humanity forever, So if the basis of Christianity is they had to escape Herod, who was a dictator, and so on, we see that in the news all the time. And what happened in Nazareth was this miracle that Christians believe in, and other people, other religions, of course, pay respect to it. But that is so much part of the human story. And it seemed to me that it's something that we can learn from. How do we help people in need? Who could be us? And the other thing is it caused me to reflect a lot about my own family. My family name is Esler, which is German, and they came to the United Kingdom in the 17th century because the 30 Years' War, which was a war about religion, again, something we're still familiar with.
Indeed.
They were Protestants in a Catholic area, and they came north, met the Scottish Army, who were Protestant, and came to Scotland. So my family were refugees. Admittedly, it's 400 years ago. And many of the people in this country, you look at the names of people going back, they came from, some were Huguenots from France, some were Jewish people, there were people, and now there are people from all over the world, including, for example, Syria, although some have been able to go back because of the developments recently. So it really, being involved with KRAN, just made me think a lot more about our common humanity and the links between people and the links between generations. And also it made me think that kindness is part of this. Not always, because people are very often suspicious of the stranger. That's also biblical too.
Sure.
But again, one of the great biblical stories is the man who helped the Samaritan. The story of the good Samaritan who helped somebody in need, but who was not of his particular tribe. So religions are about that, and Christmas was a time to think a lot about it, I think.
Absolutely. And I guess it's just, I do think about it in the same way, because if you, to come to the UK, I could see lots of multicultures. I could see lots of people from different country, from different religion, from different any aspect that you can think about it. And I guess some people, they take the only good part of it, and then they don't want to involve on the other part of it, which is what's happening, what's the background of that kind of person, rather than to think of the individual because they are just here. But what's the country is holding, why is being freed? And I guess it's just, as a refugee, as you said, we all refugees, and in some point you see what's happening in Ukraine. It can be in any countries, and I guess it's just the point of kindness that you mentioned is that's what needed for people to understand.
Yeah, and a bit understanding is the key of it as well. And the other thing I have seen, I've talked, because we're in Kent, I know people who work in Border Force who have told me about what it is like when a boat comes in of people who have been on that sea in weather that is quite often terrible, and have their children on the boat. Now, people, you don't risk your child's life on the sea, on a hostile sea like that, for any of the kind of tropes that are sometimes said about people who come from abroad. Oh, they're just here they don't want to work, or they're taking our jobs, or all the usual kind of stuff that people say. You do it because you're desperate.
Absolutely.
For some reason. And the border force people I've talked to have told me stories that are really quite horrific about how the condition of people and condition of children when they're picked up. So border force has got border force has got a job to do, obviously, but the rest of us have got to actually understand what is driving people. And also, we've also got to understand there's a difference between people who are refugees and people who are migrants who come for other reasons, including perhaps because they bring talents and will do jobs that other people will not do. And so I've never, I think every country has to control its borders in some way. And a lot of countries, including ours, have found that very difficult recently and got to think of a better way. But that does not mean that we should not be compassionate towards people who are in real trouble.
Absolutely. And that's taking me to the next question, basically, is just as a broader landscape, we have what has changed basically for refugees and asylum seeker in the UK and globally. And are we moving to positive direction, or there is like areas still need to be obviously changed, especially now lots of changes coming, but especially again on the media, what we see, is this the whole story of what happening to refugees?
Well, I think, again, we've got to separate refugees from immigration.
Sure.
The two things are connected, clearly, but they're not the same thing. And, we're going to see a change in the presidency in the United States. We've seen Donald Trump, who's going to suggest he's going to use trade barriers against Canada and Mexico to encourage them not to allow migrants into the country. The only thing I would say is, this is talking about migrants now in particular, is that Donald Trump's grandfather was a migrant from Germany. His name was Drumpf. Elon Musk's family came from South Africa. So we are all from somewhere. Absolutely. And it may not be from the place that we're in now. And in terms of the refugee question, I think what would be wonderful would be if politicians would separate the two and say, we are going to allow in migration, legal migration for people we need for the economy, or whatever politicians come up with. They've got to think about it. But we're also still going to be generous for people who have nothing, and we're going to take whatever our fair share might be, or we're going to do our best to ameliorate the problems that are driving people, because there's a pull factor, which is rich countries quite often pay more and have better jobs and a better opportunity, and we all want that for our children. But there's also a massive push factor from, as we saw in Syria a few years ago, a mass emigration of people because they feared for their lives, and now many of those people are going back. They don't want to be migrants to this country, but Indeed. They were people in need at the time, and we have to help. Absolutely.
And I guess it's the term, because looking onto into my story again, I prefer the word refugees, because that shows why the reason I obviously left my home to be in this country. And I guess lots of people think that is an option, to be refugee is an option. It's just to think about a beautiful day, think I'm going out to the UK or going to this country. And I guess people tend not to understand what's the real story of refugees, and that's to make it less empathy and less thinking about the example that you draw between the comparison basically about migrant and refugees, and that one is got an option where to want to work, and it's still you think about it and then you process it. However, being a refugee is you have no option basically.
Yes, and humans always fear the other, somebody different. They must be, what are they like? And you can understand that. But if you actually meet someone face to face,
agree,
it makes it very, very difficult. Let me tell you a story about when although I'm Scottish, I've got some roots in Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland was hugely divided between Protestants and Catholics. And there's still some divisions now, but thankfully there's peace. But during the Troubles, when I lived there as a teenager, and when I got a job there, actually, slightly later after I was at university, there was somebody I know who was a teacher in a school, which was mostly Protestants, but there were some Catholics in the school. And some of the Protestant boys were talking about how they really hated Catholics because there was some terrorist attack that they blamed on the other people. And my friend said, but And they pointed to one of the boys in the class who happened to be a Catholic and was a friend of the boy who was shouting off. And he said, "Oh no, but that's my mate."
Yeah.
So these are 15-year-olds, but we have that capacity in our heads to see things differently if we don't really know them, and a bit of fear. And there are some people who stir up those fears for political ends, unfortunately. And that's one of the sad things. But if you actually meet any of the people who, and I've been privileged to do so, who have come here and got personal stories, sometimes very difficult personal stories, it is then very difficult to see them as anything other than another human being who needs something. Maybe just not a handout, but a hand up, a bit of help.
I did have that same story, like similar, basically, when I'd done one of the interview, who said, "Oh, I'm not against refugees. My wife, she come from this country, da 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 da." And I guess it's like, what most like really for me, like to understand why people would fear me, for example, like the way I came and the way, because you haven't met me yet. But then I learned like to understand that it's a kind of a mechanism protection, like for that person, like to be protected of what they hold and fearing that that person would take anything. So that's why all the time saying like, we do contribute to this society. We do contribute to the UK. We do contribute as refugees. So it's not like about we take it. And that's the wrong, I like been for a long time since I've been here, like honestly, to understand that why people think us in a negative way, which is, that would take me to the next question is like, as a storyteller, how would you change that kind of perspective? How would you shift that negative narrative of people presenting, for example, you, or like how would they, and linking towards like refugee, a lot of it is negative, a lot of it in the media. Is it challenging for me, especially like to be a media ambassador, or like even for this podcast, to present that positive image of people need to understand why. How would that kind of shit be working?
Yeah, I think it is difficult. There's a number of quite difficult areas, but the one key thing is that people find it very difficult to relate to statistics. If I said to you that 1%, 10%, 0.01%, 0.0001% of people in this country were refugees, people, kind of blanket. They don't really know. But what people do relate to is a human story.
Absolutely.
So they relate to the struggles that you went through and other people went through, if you can tell that story. And one of the problems, it seems to me, for KRAN or for anybody involved with refugees or refugees themselves, is how do you share that story when it's very private, and for many people it can be traumatic for obvious reasons. That's what perhaps part of the refugee story. I happened to meet somebody the other day. He's a Kurdish guy who runs at least 2 businesses in this country. And he, as you know, there are several million Kurds in many different countries. They do not have a country of their own, and they are sometimes suppressed in different countries. And he got out, including when he came to Europe, essentially walking to the Greek border to get to Europe. Now, his story, I couldn't do that. He lost a lot of weight, he was sick, and he was a young man. He has come here, and he's now in his late 40s and runs a couple of successful businesses. Now, it seems to me that story is a story worth telling. This is a story of being positive and so on. There are other people who tell negative stories deliberately about somehow being swamped, as if there's massive, there's so many people coming here. And in fact, the number of refugees who come to the United Kingdom is a very tiny, tiny proportion of the number of migrants who come legally to the country. So if you're worried about migration, then talk about migration, but don't pick on refugees.
I guess we became like escape of like blaming. Like whenever there's something, I just feel like we're there to be blamed of anything.
It's your fault, and it's your fault. And sadly, this is exploited because it quite often is people who have difficulties finding a job, or difficulties getting a career, or difficulties getting a hospital appointment, who somehow blame foreigners or refugees or migrants for their plight without sometimes understanding that there are people, for example, working in hospitals whose background is precisely the thing that they complain about, which is something you may have heard of.
I do have that, believe me, because I'm obviously now like a registered nurse, but when I was a student nurse as well, the first thing they will ask me, where are you from? Did you come with your family and did you came to study? And I'm happy. I'm absolutely open about my story. And I tell them the story. Some of that I really take it really gratefully, like saying thank you for being here. And then, but you've got the other side that will say, because there's really one, a lady said to me that you must have lots of money to come to the UK. And I wish,
Did you laugh?
I did. I just like, obviously not in front of her face, but I was like, I was shocked. I was like, lots of money. Why would I risk my life just if I have that lots of money? I could have just been like in another place. And I guess it's just the kind of, the negative side of how we've been presented. That's kind of make people not to be open to understand what's it's been like. And there's other aspect as well, like being in the UK for a long time now. I mean, don't know how long is it, but again, understanding the issue of like the NHS and other things is always like us the blame for all of these things is happening. And I guess like sometimes I feel like if we left, everything is going to be sorted, which is I totally know that is not going to be.
Well, I think you're hitting on absolutely the right point. It's very easy to blame other people for the difficulties that we experience in our lives. It's not my fault. It's the government's fault. Or it's not, if it's not the government's fault, it's the government's fault for letting all these other people into our country and they're doing all these things.
Surely.
Otherwise, my life would be much better. And people often do that. But what makes it worse is when they are exploited through sections of the media, particularly social media. And that stirs people up, unfortunately, and that can cause social tensions. And we've seen riots over the summer, some of which was clearly stirred up by people who don't want to solve problems, they want to create them. And that is a real difficulty for all of us, I'm afraid.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So the last question I've got now for today is to wrap up with it, which is, what do you hope for the future as a patron of KRAN? Like, what's kind of ideas or plan or anything?
I hope for a number of things.
Yeah.
One is I would really hope that some of the human stories of the people that are working KRAN and are part of KRAN and are helped by KRAN get through, and we can tell these positive stories of people who have been incredibly brave and have done extraordinary things and continue to do extraordinary things, and also, like nurses in our NHS,
thank you,
do a great job. So I hope that happens. Secondly, I would really like to see a more mature political debate. I think it would be really, really good if we would, first of all, if we would separate students from the migration system in a different way. Not just say, if you're a student here and you're from abroad, you're a migrant, because you probably are going to go home to wherever your home is. You've come here because we've got great universities. And just have a more mature debate about who comes here and why they come here. And the third thing is, I think it would be, I talked to a professor called Hein de Haas, who used to be a professor at Oxford, and he's now in Holland, in the Netherlands, and the professor of university there. And he's written a very interesting book about migration. And one of the things he says is he really wants a kind of grown-up debate about migration. How many migrants do we need? Do we have temporary migrants? Do we have people who come here because we absolutely need to headhunt them for the talents? And he said to me, that really stuck in my head, he said, do you know one of the worst things you can do about migration is to build a wall? And I said, I'm sorry, I don't understand what you mean. I know
this idea from Trump, isn't it?
From Donald Trump. And I said, well, what does it mean? He said, migrants have always come in, from Mexico and Latin America to California, Texas, and elsewhere as seasonal migrants. And they do the jobs and then they go home. But if you build a wall, people are likely to stay if they get in your country.
Wow.
And he was saying that in terms of Brexit, one of the problems has been we have many, and we still have, particularly in Kent, we have many Europeans who used to come and work part-time in the summer in the wonderful apple orchards we have and elsewhere. And it's been more difficult to get labour, so they're sourcing labour from other places.
Yeah.
But that's a natural pool of economics, and people have to understand that, and also understand that there are some people who will be seasonal migrants, and that's a good thing. Or there'll be other people in the NHS and our universities and scientists and others who will come here because this is a brainy country with some great universities. So just to sum that up, I would just like a more realistic approach, a hard-nosed approach. Yes, we should have borders. Yes, we should have checks. Yes, we should check people's identity. Can you come here? Can't you? But we should have a more grown-up conversation about what we need and what we don't need. And within that, the very small group of people, relatively, who find themselves as refugees here should be treated not just humanely, but given a better life. And perhaps, as is happening with many people from Syria, will find their way back to their original country because that's where they really want to be.
Sure. Thank you so much, Gavin. And that's at the end of our podcast. For our listener, if you would like to know more about KRAN and support their work, visit our www.kran.org.uk. Thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe and share. Thank you.